Throughout its history, the Cleveland Orchestra has reflected a community's ability to sustain. As board president Thomas L. Seidlow put it so eloquently, something fine and beautiful. Hey guys, today we're taking a look at the Cleveland Orchestra Story, Second to None by Donald Rosenberg. I'm very excited to talk a little bit about this. This is a book review, but it's more just me talking about it. I'm not actually like reviewing in the sense of like I don't really have a whole lot of critiques. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the book in case you're interested in picking it up or something. For those of you who don't know anything about me, about a month from now, I'm moving to Cleveland, Ohio. I'm going to be attending the Cleveland Institute of Music for my master's program. So I kind of wanted to read this book to kind of, get me a little more familiar with the Cleveland Orchestra, as there's huge ties between the Cleveland Orchestra and the Cleveland Institute of Music. I'm going to be studying with Michael Sachs, who's the current principal trumpet of the Cleveland Orchestra. It's kind of cool seeing his name in this. It's really, really cool, actually. He's not my teacher right now, but he's going to be my teacher. So it's cool to see him in the book, and also, obviously, all the other former trumpet players. As talked about a little bit, trumpet players aren't really the focus of this book. This is all about the orchestra as a whole, and a little bit more about... It seemed, there was a lot of music talk in it, but a lot of it too was administrative, which I found to be really interesting. Anyways, I'm getting too much into it. This is by a guy named Donald Rosenberg. This is a cool copy that I have. You can buy this on the Cleveland Orchestra website, I believe, at their store. I'm not 100% sure. I was going to do that, and then it was like $40 or something like that. And I was like, okay, I am not in a place financially where I can buy a $40 book. So I found this used for like $5 online, and I actually have a signed copy of this book, which is really cool. It says, "To Gloria, who does so much for music in Cleveland. All the best, Don Rosenberg, November 10th, 2000, the year 2000. So kind of interesting there. A little bit about Donald Rosenberg. I'm just going to read a little bit of the snippet in the back of the book here. Donald Rosenberg is the classical music critic for The Plain Dealer and vice president of the Music Critics Association of North America. He was formerly music and dance critic of the Akron Beacon Journal and the Pittsburgh Press. His writing has appeared in Symphony Magazine, Opera News, Opera, Musical America, and other publications. An accomplished French horn player, he has performed at the Aspen, Marlborough music festivals. He is a graduate of the, I should know this, Man's College of Music. That's where he got his bachelor degree, and then the Yale School of Music, Master of Music, and Master of Musical Arts degree. He was born in New York City and lives in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And all of that information, I believe, is current as far as the year 2000. This book also covers the founding of the orchestra in the late 1800s. Is that right? Well, I guess maybe not the founding of it necessarily, but the start of this book features from 1842 up to the year 2000, so anything between 2000 and 2021, or whenever you're watching this video. It is not up to date. I don't know if there have been what is it called, updated editions or whatever. I do not have an updated edition, so I just have up through the year 2000. Which there's a lot of stuff happened in there. So really interesting book. So what's it all about? It's all about the Cleveland Orchestra. It's divided up into 4 parts, and I will read them off for you so you get an idea. Part 1 is Showing Promise. It encompasses the years 1842 to 1933. Part 2 is Earning a Reputation, 1933 to 1946. Maybe I'm just kind of blabbering. I don't have this video really planned out. But Part 1 was Showing Promise. As I look through, I'll just kind of speak a little bit on some stuff that I remember. I read this probably like 3 weeks ago I finished it, so it's a little fuzzy. But one thing, Adela Prentice Hughes, I believe. I also apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name in here. I am really bad with pronunciations, especially as we get into some of these conductors. I'm just going to make an absolute fool of myself. But 'tis life. Anyway, Adela Prentice Hughes, the founder of the Cleveland Orchestra. Really interesting, all of the stuff in here. But I think the most fascinating thing for me is, as a member, or I'm going to school at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I have access to the Cleveland Orchestra streaming service, which is called Adela, which I can't imagine isn't named after Adela Prentice Hughes. And if I hadn't read this book, I would have no idea that, that's why it's named Adela. So it's just so cool learning a little bit about the history, and you just pick up on stuff like that. And I'm sure going to school there, I'll pick up on so much more. But I just thought that was really cool, that, one of the founders of the Cleveland Orchestra is what they named their current streaming service after. Something that Adela would have probably never even been able to imagine. But it's also really cool, Adela, if you're interested in checking it out. But anyways, moving on, I said Part 2, Earning a Reputation, 1933 to 1946. That talks about the first years of the Cleveland Orchestra starting out. The beginning of the Cleveland Orchestra is not, what it was today. They were not, at the beginning, they were not really competing with, the New York Philharmonic, Chicago Symphony Orchestra. They were not up to that level. But Artur Rodzinski was the first conductor, and he did a lot of work to kind of bring the orchestra up. Obviously, being the first conductor, he had a lot of stuff to do, but that was a really, really fascinating chapter. My battery's gonna die. 1 second. All right, I'm back now. Hopefully I'm picking up where I left off. But Part 2, we're talking about Arthur Rodzinski. Part 3, Reaching the Top, 1946 to 1970. This is when the Cleveland Orchestra really started to become world class, I would say, and arguably with one of, if not the greatest conductor the Cleveland Orchestra has had, George Zell. The amount of phenomenal recordings and just the stories that are in here about him, being, for lack of a better term, kind of a hard ass, but man, he got his musicians to work and make the most beautiful sounds that they could possibly produce. And it's really interesting reading about him and also reading about other musicians' perspectives on Zell. It seemed like the consensus was in rehearsals, he could be a little scary, but you knew the final product was going to be fantastic. So that was really fascinating, learning about George Zell. It also talks about in this chapter summer music, which is I think Blossom is their summer music festival. That was also really interesting reading about too, kind of transitioning the orchestra from more of a not necessarily part-time, but more to, the musicians wanted to get paid is what I'm trying to say. So with that summer music festival, they were able to make enough income so they didn't have to work at the local butcher shop or whatever. Along with being a musician, they could support themselves fully doing music, working for the Cleveland Orchestra. So that was interesting learning about that. That is still the same summer home they have today. So it's going on right now, actually. So that was really cool. Part 4 is Unwavering Commitment, 1970 to 2000. That kind of talks about the transition from George Zell eventually to Mozell. Why can't I think of his first name? Lauren Mazel eventually. And then along with that, eventually, once he was done, to Christoph von Johanni. Oh man, I'm so sorry. I can't pronounce any names. But yeah, and then, you know, obviously it kind of ends after that because it only goes up to the year 2000. But it was really interesting learning about all of the conductors and kind of their own things. Also, you know, like what they specialized in, just reading some of the things, like the way they thought about music. It was just a really fascinating read, just all around. And again, it was really fascinating learning more about the administrative sides, you know, the musicians, working with the union to fight for better pay raises. And also with that, by allowing the musicians to get paid more, they were able to keep the talent that they had. You know, there's a lot of stories in here of, especially in the earlier years, really good players leaving for New York or Chicago or Boston or other places that paid better because they just couldn't survive. And it's also interesting, you know, Cleveland isn't known today probably as one of the most thriving cities in the United States. Way back in the day, it was kind of a similar story to Detroit. You know, any of these Rust Belt, Midwestern. I'm from Wisconsin, so I kind of have sort of idea about, you know, all the factory jobs and everything that was lost. You know, so it's really interesting to learn about the Cleveland Orchestra. It's also it's also interesting, like, about the war and stuff, when musicians got drafted to World War II, the different conductors, they were, you know, they didn't go straight from each of these behemoths of conductors that we see. You know, there were in-between ones, and also interesting learning about conductors who had considered going there and then decided to go to Chicago Symphony, and it's just stuff like that. Really, really interesting book. So that was a very long, what's it about? So anyways, pros and cons about this book. I guess it's a great book. The only con might be, obviously, if you're not interested about orchestral stuff, this book definitely isn't going to interest you too much. If you're expecting this to be all about music or vice versa, all about business, it's kind of a combination of both. It shows you the inner workings of the orchestra, and I would say it leans more in that direction. This book is not telling you, well, in Beethoven 9, this blah, blah, blah. There's a little bit of that, but most of it is about the orchestra, the Cleveland Orchestra as a whole. It is interesting seeing, like, oh, and this night they did this in the program or whatever. And they'll give you more broad overviews of this conductor really liked to play this or whatever. But and like I said too, there's specific things on, you know, how certain conductors thought about music and blah, blah, blah. But that's not the main purpose of this book, I would say. This is a historical document of the Cleveland Orchestra and how it progressed over time and how it grew and, you know, to what it is today. That's more what the book is about. The writing style it's really easy to read. I know this looks like a huge book. I think it's like 550, about 550 pages. This last little bit here is just like photo credits and, you know, like an index. It's also interesting. It also has all of the musicians that have ever played in the Cleveland Orchestra up to the year 2000. So really interesting. I found my teacher, you know, and all that stuff. Really, really cool. But it also has a bibliography at the end. So it's not like a quick read, really. And, you know, I'll be honest, I take a while. I read while I walk on the treadmill when I work out. So this took me a while to read through. It was like a month or so. And there were some days where I really didn't feel like reading about it, just to be completely honest. I'm much more interested in the music side of things rather than just reading about the business side. But it's really interesting stuff, and I'm glad I read it just to give me, again, like I said, an overall view of the Cleveland Orchestra. I think there are a couple other books like this. I don't know if there's any it's quite as comprehensive as this one. But anyways, would I recommend this book? Yes, if you are at all interested in learning anything about the Cleveland Orchestra, if you like classical music, you're interested in the inner workings of an orchestra, how all that works, if you really like one of these conductors, that's really where the story leads. Occasionally you'll hear about the concertmaster, and there are a few times, for me, I'm a trumpet player, when Bernard Edelstein, again, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, but, and then my teacher is mentioned towards the very end of the book, and I'm sure that happens with other instruments, I just didn't pick up on it, but that definitely is not, a major point in this book. It's not really a whole lot about musicians. Musicians are mentioned, but it's definitely leading you through the journey of the Cleveland Orchestra along with all the conductors, which totally makes sense. They're the face of the orchestra, right? So yeah, I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in classical music, anyone who's interested in learning more about Cleveland too. There's a lot of interesting points in here just about the city of Cleveland, and when it was going through a rough time, various things about like donors and all of that stuff too. So, really interesting book. I can't wait. I've never heard the Cleveland Orchestra live. I've listened to numerous recordings, obviously, but I've never heard them live, and I will be hearing them live a bunch coming up here. I'm moving in about a month here, so really, really excited to start that journey. Like I said, I just kind of wanted to check out this book, just familiarize myself a little bit more with the Cleveland Orchestra so I don't look like a complete idiot. But yeah, anyways, super great book if you're interested in any of that stuff. If you have no interest in orchestra or anything, I would not recommend reading this book. You will be unbelievably bored. But I really enjoyed it. So, well-deserved spot on my shelf. Running out of a room here once again, which is great. But anyways, thanks so much for watching. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Comment below if there's any other books. I've read a couple other, like, specifically orchestral books. Arnold Jacobs' Song in Wind. I took the other book off my shelf, but also Sprach Zarathustra. Not Zarathustra. Also Sprach Jacobs, or whatever that big red book is. Read through that one. This is from Kent Reeder. Is that his name? Or no, Tim Kent. But it's about Bud Herseth and Chicago Symphony. I read one other one, I thought. It was like a Winton book, but I want to read more books like this. I have a Mahler book that I'm going to be reading eventually here. But if you have any suggestions in that realm of things, I'm always looking for new stuff to read, so please do comment that below. If you have any questions on the Cleveland Orchestra or anything about the book, I'm more than happy to try and answer any questions. I'm by no means an expert or anything, but if you have any questions or any corrections, I may have, correct all my mispronunciations if you want down below. But anyways, thanks so much for watching. I'll quit babbling. See you on the next one.
Thank you.